For years, it felt like the entire car industry was moving in one direction. Electric cars were everywhere. Every headline, every launch event, every billionaire CEO seemed to repeat the same message. The future belongs to EV. Companies like Tesla and BYD were dominating conversations, pushing faster, bigger, more futuristic machines into the market almost every month. And in the middle of all that noise, Toyota stayed strangely quiet. No dramatic promises, no desperate race for attention, which is exactly why what happened next caught so many people off guard. Because when Toyota revealed the new Toyota Corolla, something unusual happened. People stopped scrolling. Auto channels started talking. Forums exploded with arguments. And suddenly, a car that wasn't even fully electric became one of the most discussed vehicles in the world. At first, it didn't make sense. How could a hybrid sedan create this much attention at a time when everyone was obsessed with futuristic EVs? But the deeper people looked, the more uncomfortable the answer became for the rest of the industry. Toyota wasn't trying to win the future overnight. It was trying to solve a problem most companies quietly ignored because, behind all the excitement around EV, there was another conversation happening privately, a much more honest one. People worried about charging stations. They worried about battery replacement costs. They worried about long-distance trips. They worried about what happens when technology moves faster than infrastructure. And most importantly, millions of ordinary drivers were asking themselves one question they rarely said out loud: what if I'm not ready yet? That question became the opening Toyota had been waiting for. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable for the rest of the industry, because while other companies were busy convincing the world to completely abandon gasoline, Toyota was studying something much simpler: human behavior. The company understood that most people don't wake up excited to experiment with new technology. They just want a car that works every morning, a car that doesn't create stress, a car they can trust when taking their family on a long trip at night. And Toyota realized something many companies didn't want to admit for a huge part of the world. Fully electric cars still felt like a gamble. Not because EVs were bad, but because real life is messy. In major cities, electric vehicles can feel perfect. Charging stations are nearby. Roads are modern. Electricity is stable. But outside those environments, things change quickly. Smaller towns, long highways, unpredictable power grids, places where charging infrastructure still barely exists. Toyota understood that the future wasn't arriving evenly for everyone, and instead of forcing people into a sudden transition, it decided to build something in between. That in-between became Toyota's greatest weapon. The Corolla wasn't introduced as some revolutionary spaceship on wheels. In fact, that was part of its strength. It looked familiar, safe, practical, but hidden inside was Toyota's quiet answer to the EV revolution: hybrid technology refined over decades. A system designed not to shock drivers with change, but to slowly guide them toward it. And the strange part is, Toyota had been preparing for this moment for years. Most people forget that. Toyota was working on hybrid systems long before many EV companies even existed. Back when electric cars still felt experimental, Toyota was already testing how to combine fuel efficiency with everyday reliability. But while the world chased dramatic innovation, hybrids slowly faded into the background. They weren't flashy enough. They didn't create viral headlines. They were seen as temporary technology until suddenly they weren't. Because as EV adoption started growing, so did the doubts around it. Range anxiety, charging queues, expensive batteries, long charging times during travel. The conversation around electric cars slowly became more complicated than the industry expected. And that's when Toyota's strategy started looking less old-fashioned and more calculated. The new Corolla arrived at exactly the right time. Not too early, not too late, right when people started questioning whether the industry had moved too fast. And Toyota knew something important about fear. People rarely reject the future itself. They reject uncertainty. That's why the Corolla feels different from many modern EVs. It doesn't ask drivers to completely change their lifestyle overnight. There's no pressure to plan every route around charging stations. No anxiety about battery percentages during long trips. You simply fill the tank, drive normally, and let the hybrid system handle the rest. For many drivers, That simplicity feels almost revolutionary now, especially because the technology works quietly in the background. In city traffic, the electric motor often handles most of the movement. The car feels smooth and silent. Fuel consumption drops, but the moment extra power is needed on highways, the petrol engine takes over automatically. No complicated switching, no learning curve. The driver barely notices the transition happening underneath. That's exactly the point. Toyota designed the experience to feel invisible. Because most people don't actually care about showing off futuristic technology. Every time they drive, they care about whether the car fits naturally into their life. School runs, office traffic, weekend family trips, daily routines. Toyota focused on reducing friction instead of maximizing spectacle. But this only becomes important once you compare convenience instead of hype, because once that comparison begins, the entire conversation changes suddenly. The battle isn't just about who builds the most advanced car anymore. It becomes a battle over who understands ordinary people better. And that shift creates a serious problem for companies, betting everything on a fully electric future. Take Tesla, for example. Tesla represents speed, disruption, innovation. It pushes people toward the future aggressively. And for many customers, that vision is exciting. But Toyota plays a completely different psychological game. Instead of saying, change your life immediately, Toyota says, keep living normally, just more efficiently. That message is incredibly powerful, because while EV enthusiasts often dominate online conversations, the majority of global drivers still think practically first. They calculate fuel costs, maintenance, reliability, resale value, service availability. They don't want to become early adopters of unfinished systems. They want stability, and stability is where Toyota becomes dangerous. For decades, Toyota built its reputation on one thing above everything else: trust. People believe Toyota cars survive for years with fewer problems. Families pass them down across generations. Taxi drivers rely on them. Small business owners depend on them. In many parts of the world, buying a Toyota doesn't feel risky. It feels safe. Now imagine combining that trust with modern hybrid technology at a moment when people are becoming uncertain about fully electric vehicles. That's what makes the Corolla so important. Not because it destroys EVs, but because it quietly exposes the biggest weakness in the EV revolution: the assumption that everyone is ready for it right now and globally. That assumption is starting to crack. Even governments and manufacturers are beginning to realize the transition may not happen as smoothly as expected. Building millions of charging stations takes time. Electrical grids need upgrades. Battery supply chains remain expensive and politically sensitive. The industry presented EVs as an immediate replacement for gasoline cars. But reality turned out slower and more complicated. Toyota saw that complication earlier than most, which is why the Corolla now feels less like a regular car launch and more like a statement that the future may arrive in stages. And maybe that's why the discussion around this car keeps growing worldwide, because deep down, the Corolla represents something millions of people secretly wanted all along: progress without pressure. Not everyone wants to be first. Sometimes people just want to feel ready and the uncomfortable. Question now spreading across the industry is this: what if Toyota understood that before everyone else? That question becomes even more interesting once you look at where the real growth in the global car market is happening. Because the future of the auto industry is not decided only in places like California, Shanghai, or Oslo. It's also decided in crowded cities across Asia, in expanding towns across Africa, in developing regions where infrastructure still struggles to keep up with demand, and in many of those places, the dream of a fully electric future still feels very far away. That's where Toyota's strategy starts, looking almost unsettlingly realistic. Because while some companies designed their future around ideal conditions, Toyota designed its cars around imperfect reality: unstable electricity, long travel distances, limited charging networks, rising fuel prices, customers who cannot afford to experiment with expensive technology. Instead of assuming the world would quickly adapt to EV, Toyota assumed the transition would be messy, uneven, and slow. And that single assumption may have changed everything, because the more people started discussing EV limitations openly, the more hybrids stopped looking like temporary technology and started looking like the safer middle ground. Suddenly, buyers who once felt pressured to go fully electric began reconsidering. They started asking whether a balanced approach actually made more sense. And once that shift in thinking started, Toyota gained something incredibly valuable: time, while competitors raced to solve infrastructure problems. Battery production ceased.